You have been using a power your entire life without realizing what it is or how it works. It is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not demand effort or strain or force. And because it is so subtle, most people overlook it completely, even though it is shaping their entire experience of reality every single day. This power is not found in action. It is not found in repetition or hustle or constant mental effort. It is not something you activate by trying harder. In fact, the more you try to control it, the more it slips out of reach. This power works in the background, beneath thought, beneath emotion, beneath conscious intention. It works through what you quietly assume to be true about yourself, about life, and about what is possible for you. Most people believe their life is shaped by circumstances. They believe things happen first, and then they react. They believe success, peace, love, or abundance must arrive before they are allowed to feel secure, confident, or whole. But that belief alone keeps the power you possess dormant, because the quiet power you have been overlooking does not respond to what happens to you. It responds to the state you live from. This is where everything begins to shift. Your life is not responding to what you want. It is responding to what feels normal to you. It is responding to what you unconsciously expect. It is responding to what you have already accepted as likely, reasonable, or inevitable. And those expectations are rarely loud. They do not sound like affirmations. They do not announce themselves as beliefs. They exist as a background sense of, this is how things go for me. That background sense is the quiet power. Think about how often you move through your day without actively thinking about who you are. You're not constantly telling yourself your name. You're not reminding yourself of your identity. And yet you never forget who you are. It is assumed. It is stable. It is familiar. In the same way, you are constantly assuming things about your place in the world, about what you are capable of, about what tends to happen when you try something new, about how life responds to you. Those assumptions do not feel dramatic. They feel ordinary. And that is why they are powerful. Most people are waiting for something external to give them permission to shift internally. They are waiting for proof. They are waiting for evidence. They are waiting for a breakthrough moment where everything finally changes and they can relax. But the quiet power you have been overlooking works in the opposite direction. It begins when you stop waiting and start inhabiting a different inner position now. This does not mean pretending. It does not mean lying to yourself. It does not mean forcing positive thoughts on top of fear. It means recognizing that your internal position is not caused by life. It is chosen, often unconsciously, and then reinforced until it feels fixed. When you assume something is difficult, your body tightens, your perception narrows, your choices shrink. When you assume something is possible, even slightly, your posture changes, your breath deepens, your mind becomes more open. Opportunities that were invisible before begin to register. Nothing magical happened on the outside. The shift happened quietly on the inside. That is the power. It is not excitement. It is not motivation. It is not intensity. It is a subtle sense of permission. A quiet internal decision that says, this is allowed now. And the moment that decision is made, life reorganizes around it in ways you could not have planned. This is why so many people work endlessly on themselves and still feel stuck. They're trying to change outcomes without changing the position they are living from. They're trying to think differently while still assuming the same things at a deeper level. They are applying effort where acceptance is required. The quiet power does not require you to convince anyone. It does not require you to fight doubt. It does not require you to eliminate fear before moving forward. It only requires that you stop arguing for the limitations you have already outgrown. You may not realize it, but there are assumptions you no longer believe that are still shaping your behavior. Old conclusions that no longer make sense logically, yet still feel emotionally real. Ideas about struggle, timing, worthiness, or effort that were learned long ago and never questioned again. These assumptions do not shout. They whisper. And because they whisper, they go unchallenged. But once you see them, you cannot unsee them. The quiet power you have been overlooking is not about becoming someone new. It is about releasing the internal resistance to who you already are becoming. It is about allowing the next version of your life to feel natural before it feels visible. This is why inner shifts often feel anticlimactic. There is no dramatic moment, no fireworks, no sudden rush. Instead, there is a soft sense of settling, a subtle relaxation, a feeling that something has already changed, even though nothing on the outside looks different yet. That feeling is not imagination, it is alignment. And alignment is not something you chase. It is something you allow by stopping the internal fight. When you stop insisting that things must be harder than they are. When you stop measuring your progress by tension. When you stop using effort as proof of worth. When you stop waiting for external permission to feel stable inside. That is when the quiet power begins to work on your behalf. From that place, action becomes clearer. Decisions become simpler. Timing feels less urgent. And life begins to respond with less friction. Not because you forced it to, but because you are no longer blocking it with outdated assumptions. This is not a technique. It is a recognition. You are not here to overpower life. You are here to move with it from a steadier internal position. And that position is available now, not after you fix everything, not after you achieve more, not after you become different. The quiet power has always been available to you. You simply learned to overlook it by being taught that effort equals value and struggle equals progress. But what if the greatest shifts happen when you stop pushing and start allowing a new internal normal to take hold? That question is not meant to be answered yet. It is meant to sit with you, because the moment you allow it to feel reasonable, something inside you will begin to rearrange itself quietly, naturally, without force. And that rearrangement is the beginning of everything changing. As you begin to recognize this quiet power, the next realization often feels unsettling at first. You start to notice how much of your life has been shaped not by conscious choice, but by patterns that were never deliberately selected. Patterns of expectation, patterns of reaction, patterns of identity that formed slowly, invisibly, through repetition and emotional experience. Most of what you assume feels so familiar that it does not register as an assumption at all. It feels like truth. It feels like realism. It feels like just the way things are. And yet, this sense of realism is rarely neutral. It carries emotional weight. It carries a tone. It carries an orientation toward life that either opens you or quietly closes you. The quiet power operates through this orientation. Consider how two people can face the same situation and experience entirely different outcomes, not because one is smarter or more deserving, but because they are living from different internal positions. One person meets uncertainty with tension and bracing. Another meets it with a subtle sense of curiosity or neutrality. Externally, the situation looks identical. Internally, the experience is completely different. And it is the internal experience that determines what unfolds next. This is why change often feels elusive when approached from the outside. You can change environments. You can change routines. You can change strategies. But if the internal orientation remains the same, the results tend to repeat themselves in new forms. The setting changes, but the pattern does not. The quiet power you have been overlooking is the ability to shift that orientation without force. Most people believe that internal change must feel dramatic to be real. They expect a surge of confidence, a burst of certainty, a wave of motivation. But those experiences are temporary by nature. They rise and fall. The power that actually alters a life is much calmer than that. It feels more like a decision that no longer requires energy to maintain. Think about the difference between trying to feel confident and simply no longer questioning yourself in the same way. One requires effort. The other feels natural. One fluctuates. The other stabilizes. The quiet power works at the level of stabilization, not stimulation. This is where identity quietly shifts. You are always acting from who you believe yourself to be, not from who you say you want to become. Your choices, your tone, your timing, and even your hesitation are all expressions of identity in motion. And identity is not a label. It is a felt sense. It is how life feels when you move through it. When that felt sense is rooted in tension, life feels heavy. When it is rooted in ease, life feels responsive. When it is rooted in waiting, life feels delayed. When it is rooted in quiet expectation, life feels cooperative. None of this happens consciously most of the time. You're not waking up each day deciding which identity to inhabit. You are waking up and continuing the one that already feels familiar. And familiarity, not truth, is what keeps most people stuck. The quiet power begins to activate when you question familiarity. Not aggressively, not critically, but gently. You start noticing the background assumptions that color your experience. The subtle beliefs about effort, timing, worth, and safety that influence how you approach everything. You notice how often you brace before you begin, how often you expect resistance before it appears, how often you interpret neutral situations through the lens of past outcomes. These are not flaws. They are habits, and habits can be released once they are seen clearly. This is why awareness alone can be transformative. Not awareness used to fix yourself, but awareness used to understand yourself. The moment you see that an assumption is shaping your behavior, it loosens its grip. It stops operating invisibly, and what was once automatic becomes optional. That is the quiet power at work. It does not require you to replace every thought. It does not require you to monitor your mind constantly. It requires you to notice the deeper conclusions you have been living from and decide calmly whether they still serve you. Many people resist this because they equate ease with irresponsibility. They believe that if they stop pushing, things will fall apart. But pushing is often a response to fear, not commitment. It is an attempt to control outcomes that feel uncertain. And control, when driven by fear, narrows possibility rather than expanding it. The quiet power is not about letting go of care. It is about letting go of strain. There's a difference between intention and tension. Intention is clear and steady. Tension is urgent and tight. When you live from intention, life feels guided. When you live from tension, life feels reactive. Most people confuse the two and wonder why effort does not bring peace. As your internal orientation shifts, you may notice something unexpected. Your desires begin to feel less desperate. Not because you no longer want them, but because your sense of stability is no longer dependent on their immediate arrival. This is not indifference. It is trust, a quiet confidence that what aligns with your inner position will find its way to you without force. This is when life begins to feel less like a problem to solve and more like a process to participate in. You stop asking, how do I make this happen? And start asking, who am I being as this unfolds? And that question alone redirects the quiet power inward, where it has always belonged. From this place, change no longer feels like a project. It feels like a progression, something that unfolds naturally as old assumptions fall away and new ones take their place, not through repetition or struggle, but through lived experience. You begin to sense that you are no longer trying to get life right. You are learning how to be with it differently. And that difference is subtle enough to be missed, yet powerful enough to alter everything that follows. This is not the end of the shift. It is the deepening of it. Because once you see how identity and assumption shape experience, you cannot go back to believing that circumstances are in charge. The quiet power has been revealed. Now it begins to integrate. As this quiet power continues to integrate, something important begins to change in how you relate to time. You stop experiencing life as something you are constantly waiting on, and start experiencing it as something that is already moving with you. This shift alone can dissolve an enormous amount of frustration that most people unknowingly carry. Waiting creates tension. It subtly positions fulfillment in the future and reinforces the feeling that something is missing now. Even when people understand ideas about presence or alignment, they often continue to live from a waiting posture. They are waiting for proof, waiting for certainty, waiting for circumstances to confirm that it is safe to relax. But the quiet power does not respond to waiting. It responds to assumption. Assumption is not pretending. It is not positive thinking layered on top of doubt. It is the internal decision about what feels settled, what feels resolved, what feels already accounted for. When something is assumed, it no longer demands emotional energy. It becomes background certainty rather than foreground effort. This is why people who appear calm often seem lucky. They are not expending energy scanning for problems. Their attention is not fragmented. Their internal world is organized around stability rather than vigilance. And stability creates clarity. Clarity creates better choices. Better choices create better outcomes, not through force, but through alignment. Most people try to change outcomes directly. They try to manage behavior without addressing the internal position that generates it. This is why discipline alone rarely produces lasting change. Discipline fights against identity. The quiet power works by shifting identity so behavior no longer needs to be managed. When your internal position changes, your actions change naturally. You speak differently, you move differently, you respond instead of react. You choose with less hesitation. You no longer over-explain or over-correct yourself. These changes are subtle, but they accumulate. And over time, they create a life that feels coherent rather than scattered. This is where many people misunderstand manifestation and personal growth. They think it is about adding something new techniques, new habits, new routines. But most transformation happens through subtraction, removing unnecessary resistance, releasing outdated assumptions, letting go of emotional reflexes that no longer serve you. The quiet power simplifies you. It brings you back to a more natural way of engaging with life, a way that does not require constant self-monitoring or correction, a way that trusts that clarity emerges when pressure is removed. You may notice that when you stop forcing clarity, it appears. When you stop chasing motivation, it returns. When you stop demanding answers, insight arrives. This is not coincidence. It is responsiveness. Life responds to the internal space you create. This is why stillness has always been associated with wisdom. Not because stillness produces answers, but because it removes interference. The quiet power does not speak loudly. It does not compete with mental noise. It becomes accessible when you stop crowding it out. And this is not about withdrawing from life. It is about meeting life without armor. Most people are armored in ways they do not recognize. They brace emotionally. They preempt disappointment. They anticipate resistance. These habits form slowly, often as self-protection. But over time, they become the very barriers that block ease. When you loosen this armor, life feels less combative. Not because challenges disappear, but because your relationship to them changes. You are no longer trying to defend your worth or justify your existence. You are simply responding to what is in front of you with a steadier internal base. This steadiness is what allows the quiet power to express itself consistently. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It shows up as calm decision-making, as patience without passivity, as confidence without arrogance, as movement without strain. You may find that people respond differently to you without knowing why, that situations resolve with less friction, that opportunities appear without aggressive pursuit. This is not because you are doing something special. It is because your internal position is no longer interfering with flow. The quiet power works best when it is not being scrutinized. When you try to measure it, it contracts. When you try to prove it, it stalls. But when you trust it, it organizes your experience effortlessly. Trust here does not mean blind faith. It means allowing your internal state to lead rather than your fear. This is why overthinking feels exhausting. It is an attempt to replace trust with control. And control is always heavier than clarity. As you settle more deeply into this orientation, you may realize something profound. Much of what you have been trying to fix was never broken. It was simply being interpreted through a tense lens. And when that lens relaxes, the problem dissolves or becomes manageable in ways you could not see before. This is not denial, it is recalibration. The quiet power recalibrates perception first. Behavior follows. Circumstances adjust last. This sequence cannot be reversed. Trying to change circumstances without recalibrating perception keeps you cycling through the same patterns with different details. But when perception changes, circumstances reorganize naturally. You begin to live from a place that does not require constant reinforcement. You do not need constant reassurance. You do not need external validation to maintain internal stability. And this independence is what allows connection to deepen rather than weaken. The quiet power does not isolate you. It integrates you. It allows you to participate fully without losing yourself, to care deeply without clinging, to desire without grasping, to move forward without feeling chased by time. And perhaps most importantly, it returns authority to where it has always belonged. Inside your direct experience, not in outcomes, not in opinions, not in future projections. When authority returns inward, life becomes less threatening. You no longer need everything to go perfectly to feel okay. You are okay, and life unfolds from there. This is not the end of growth. It is the beginning of sustainable growth. Growth that does not burn you out. Growth that does not require constant self-improvement. Growth that feels like becoming more yourself rather than fixing yourself. The quiet power has always been present. What changes now is your willingness to stop overriding it, to stop rushing past it, to stop assuming that effort equals progress. As this understanding settles, you may feel less urgency and more direction, less pressure and more momentum, less noise and more signal. And from that place, life begins to respond in ways that feel surprisingly natural. As this internal steadiness deepens, you may start to notice something that feels almost unsettling at first. The urgency that once drove you begins to fade. The constant feeling that something needs to be fixed, achieved, or proven loses its grip. And for many people, this can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because urgency has been mistaken for purpose for so long. But urgency is not purpose. Urgency is pressure, and pressure narrows perception. When you operate from urgency, your nervous system stays in a subtle state of contraction. You scan for threats. You rush decisions. You attach your sense of safety to outcomes. Even success, when achieved from urgency, never fully satisfies because the internal posture that created it remains unchanged. The quiet power does something radically different. It expands perception instead of narrowing it. It allows you to see options instead of obstacles. It opens timing instead of compressing it. And most importantly, it returns you to a state where action comes from clarity rather than fear. This is where many people misunderstand ease. Ease is not inactivity. Ease is precision. When you are internally settled, you do not waste energy on unnecessary movement. You do not chase everything. You do not react to every stimulus. You act when it is aligned. And when you do, the action carries weight. It lands. It matters. Think about moments in your life when things unfolded smoothly. When the right conversation happened at the right time. When a decision felt obvious rather than agonizing. When effort produced results instead of resistance. Those moments were not random. They occurred when your internal state was coherent. Coherence is one of the quiet power's most important expressions. When your thoughts, emotions, and identity are aligned, your experience becomes responsive. You stop fighting life and start working with it. This does not mean life becomes effortless in the sense that nothing requires energy. It means energy is no longer wasted on inner conflict. Inner conflict is exhausting because it pulls you in opposing directions. One part of you wants expansion. Another part wants safety. One part wants growth. Another wants familiarity. When these parts are at odds, progress feels heavy. Even small steps feel draining. The quiet power resolves this conflict not by choosing sides, but by stabilizing the center. From a stable center, growth no longer feels threatening. Change no longer feels like loss. You are not abandoning yourself to move forward. You are carrying yourself with you. This is why transformation rooted in calm lasts longer than transformation rooted in force. Force creates compliance. Calm creates integration. You may notice that when you stop forcing yourself to change, change happens anyway. Habits shift without constant effort. Desires clarify without over-analysis. Relationships reorganize naturally, some deepening, some dissolving without dramatic confrontation. This is not passivity. This is alignment doing its work. One of the most subtle but powerful changes at this stage is how you relate to uncertainty. Most people treat uncertainty as danger. They rush to eliminate it. They seek guarantees. They want clarity before movement. But clarity rarely comes before movement. It comes from movement made in trust. The quiet power allows you to stand inside uncertainty without collapsing into anxiety. You can hold open questions without panicking. You can take steps without knowing the full path. And because you are not tense, you remain sensitive to feedback. You adjust quickly. You learn in real time. This flexibility is strength. Rigid systems break under pressure. Flexible systems adapt. The quiet power makes you adaptable without making you unstable. You remain grounded while remaining open. You are not rigid, and you are not reactive. As this becomes your baseline, something else begins to shift. Your relationship to success changes. Success stops being something that defines you and becomes something you experience. It no longer carries the burden of proving your worth. It becomes an expression, not a verdict. This frees you from the emotional roller coaster that most people live on. High highs followed by sharp crashes. Confidence tied to wins. Self-doubt tied to setbacks. Instead, you move from a steadier internal platform. Wins are enjoyed. Losses are processed. Neither determines who you are. This is where resilience becomes effortless. Resilience is not toughness, it is recovery speed. And recovery is fastest when you are not internally fragmented. When disappointment happens, you feel it, but you do not personalize it. You do not spiral into self-judgment. You do not rewrite your identity around a moment. The quiet power keeps perspective intact. Perspective is what allows you to stay engaged without becoming consumed, to care deeply without losing balance, to pursue goals without tying your nervous system to the outcome. This is also where your intuition becomes clearer. Intuition is not mystical. It is pattern recognition unclouded by noise. When your mind is quieter and your emotions are regulated, subtle signals become obvious. You sense when to move and when to pause, when to speak and when to listen, when to persist and when to redirect. These signals were always there. They were just drowned out by urgency and fear. As you learn to trust this internal guidance, decision-making becomes simpler. Not because choices disappear, but because alignment makes the next step obvious. You stop deliberating endlessly. You stop outsourcing decisions to other people's opinions. You take responsibility without carrying the weight of perfection. This is maturity of consciousness. It is not dramatic. It is not flashy. But it is powerful because it is stable. From this place, you begin to realize that much of what you were chasing was not the thing itself, but the feeling you believed it would give you. Safety, freedom, validation, peace. When you generate those internally, the external forms lose their urgency and, paradoxically, become easier to receive. This is one of the great reversals people experience when they align with the quiet power. When you stop needing something to feel okay, you become capable of having it without distortion. Need distorts perception. Desire does not. Desire can coexist with contentment. Need cannot. The quiet power shifts you from need to desire, from grasping to openness, from pressure to presence. And from this presence, life responds in ways that feel cooperative rather than adversarial. You are no longer pushing against the current. You are moving with it, adjusting your direction while allowing momentum to carry you forward. This is not the end of effort. It is the end of unnecessary effort. And what remains is movement that feels intentional, grounded, and sustainable. As this way of being settles into you, you begin to recognize something quietly profound. The life you are building no longer feels like something you are chasing. It feels like something you are allowing to emerge. And this shift changes not only what you experience, but how you experience it. When you live from constant effort, life feels like a series of tests. Every situation becomes a measurement. Am I doing enough? Am I falling behind? Did I miss something? Is this working? That inner interrogation drains presence from the moment. Even good things feel fragile because they are being held together by tension. But when the quiet power becomes your foundation, life stops feeling like a test and starts feeling like a conversation. You are no longer trying to dominate outcomes. You are listening, responding, adjusting. You are participating rather than performing. This is where trust begins to replace control. Control is exhausting because it requires constant vigilance. It assumes that if you loosen your grip, everything will fall apart. Trust is different. Trust does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop micromanaging reality. You remain engaged, but not clenched. And this internal unclenching is what allows life to reorganize around you in unexpected ways. People often ask why things seem to fall into place for some individuals, while others struggle endlessly. The difference is rarely intelligence or effort. It is internal resistance. When resistance drops, timing improves. When resistance drops, perception widens. When resistance drops, opportunities that were always present become visible. The quiet power does not create opportunity out of thin air. It reveals what was already there, but unseen. This is why people who are internally settled often appear lucky. They are not lucky. They are available. Available to notice. Available to respond. Available to receive. Receiving is a skill most people were never taught. Many were conditioned to believe that receiving without struggle is unsafe or undeserved. That ease must be followed by loss. That joy must be paid for later. These beliefs keep the nervous system on guard, even in moments of success. The quiet power dissolves this pattern gently. It teaches your system that stability does not require tension, that safety does not require vigilance, that good can arrive without chaos. As this becomes embodied, you begin to notice how differently you relate to time. The urgency around timelines softens. You're still moving forward, but without panic. You stop racing the clock. You stop measuring your worth against imaginary deadlines. This does not make you passive. It makes you precise. When urgency fades, discernment sharpens. You become selective. You choose depth over speed, quality over noise, alignment over approval. This is where your energy changes. Instead of being scattered across too many directions, it consolidates. Your presence becomes stronger because it is no longer fragmented. People feel this when they're around you, not because you're trying to project confidence, but because your system is coherent. Coherence is felt before it is understood. You may notice that conversations deepen, that others respond to you differently, that situations resolve with fewer words. This is not manipulation. This is resonance. When your internal state is stable, it invites stability in others. This is the quiet influence that changes environments without force. At this stage, you may realize that much of your previous striving was an attempt to feel grounded, secure, or whole. And now that those qualities are being generated internally, your goals shift. They become expressions rather than compensations. You no longer pursue success to feel worthy. You pursue it because it feels aligned. You no longer seek connection to fill a void. You seek it to share presence. You no longer chase growth to escape discomfort. You grow because expansion feels natural. This is a fundamentally different orientation to life. And from this orientation, challenges still arise, but they're experienced differently. Instead of triggering collapse or overreaction, they invite curiosity. What is this asking me to see? What adjustment is needed? What is trying to emerge? Curiosity replaces self-judgment. This is important because self-judgment is one of the loudest forces that silences the quiet power. Judgment creates contraction. It narrows perception. It keeps you trapped in loops of self-correction rather than forward movement. When judgment softens, learning accelerates. You make mistakes without making them mean something about who you are. You receive feedback without internalizing shame. You course correct it without self-punishment. This flexibility allows you to evolve faster with less suffering. Over time, this becomes your new baseline. Calm does not mean nothing happens. It means whatever happens, you remain intact. This is what true inner strength looks like. Not hardness, not domination, not constant assertion, but the ability to remain present and responsive regardless of conditions. From here, life feels less like something you are surviving and more like something you are shaping. Not through force, but through alignment, not through pressure, but through clarity. You realize that the quiet power was never something you needed to acquire. It was something you needed to stop drowning out. It was always there beneath the noise of urgency, fear, and self-correction, waiting for space, waiting for permission, waiting for stillness. And now that you have touched it, you understand something that cannot be unlearned. The most transformative shifts in your life will not come from dramatic breakthroughs. They will come from subtle internal reorganizations, from choosing steadiness over struggle, presence over pressure, trust over control. This is not a destination you arrive at once and keep forever. It is a practice, a relationship with yourself, a way of returning again and again to center when the world pulls you outward. But each time you return, it becomes easier, more familiar, more embodied. And eventually you may look back and realize that the life you once thought required constant effort is now unfolding with a sense of quiet inevitability. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped resisting yourself. This is the quiet power you have been overlooking. And once you recognize it, you will never move through life the same way again.